Sliding no back, now I'm feeling like Venom. I told her kick it, back him, squeezing a Mac, lemons, walk down, boy.
It's the dark skin Sarah's my neighbor.
And I'ma smack these little and I'ma let them ghosts blow. Oh my god.
Hey man, today's video, we got 3 disturbing true au pair horror stories. I don't know what au pair is, but this is Mr. Nightmare's latest video. So okay, let's check it out. He got some spooky stuff, man. So yeah, man, we got this video. We gonna find out what it is in the video. Let's get it. Let's get it. Au pair. Some airplane stuff? Oh shit. Nah. I let it fly. Story 1 by Julie Cole.
When I first came to the United States, I was 20 years old and working as an au pair. I didn't have much experience, but I was eager, also very nervous. I'd grown up in a small town in France and hadn't ever spent time away from home, let alone across an ocean. My English still needed work, but I was confident enough to get by. I expected it to be a good year, a new adventure, a cultural exchange, something I'd tell my friends about when I went home. I was matched with the Joseph family. I don't want to name the exact town for privacy reasons, but it was an upper middle class neighborhood. Quiet streets, nice houses, big backyards, the kind of place you'd expect to find well-behaved kids, PTA moms, and dads who worked non-stop. I remember being so relieved when I first arrived. I thought this would be easy. Nothing bad happens in places like this. The Josephs had 2 boys, Brock and Brandon. Brock, the older one, was 12. He was a pretty typical kid, kind of lazy, sometimes rude, but harmless overall. He made jokes, liked his Xbox, and mostly stayed out of trouble. Brandon, though, was different. He was 9 and already had this coldness to him. I don't know how else to describe it. There was something off. I think it's likely he had some kind of social disorder. When I first met him, he just stared at me without saying a word. Not shy or embarrassed, just staring like he was studying me. After a few seconds, he smiled and asked, "Are you the maid?" I laughed awkwardly and said I was going to help look after him and his brother for the year. He didn't laugh with me, he just kept watching. It didn't take long to realize Brandon wasn't like the other kids. My host parents warned me that he was difficult. They said he had a bit of an attitude, but that was the understatement of the century. Brandon didn't just have an attitude, he was mean. And I don't mean the usual bratty stuff like teasing his brother or refusing to eat what he was served. It was worse than that. He lied constantly, about everything. He once told his teacher that Brock tried to choke him in the kitchen, which never happened. He told a neighbor that his parents locked him in a closet at night. He even told me that the last au pair ran away because of him, and that she was never seen again. When I tried to scold him for it, he narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't tell me what to do." Everything was manageable for me, even at that point, but I do admit that I was a little frightened of him. Things only got worse from there. One night, about 2 months in, I pulled back my sheets and froze. There were thumbtacks scattered all over my mattress. I just stared for a second. Dozens, maybe 100 of them, were pointing upwards, waiting for me to lie down. My heart started racing. The mattress cover had tiny punctures everywhere. I stood there in fear, realizing how close I'd come to lying on them. Brandon had been spying on me earlier that day. I'd caught him peeking through a crack in the door when I was folding clothes. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed he was being nosy. But after seeing all those thumbtacks, I wasn't so sure. I was honestly so scared. I didn't want to tell his parents, afraid that they'd send me back to France. So I cleaned up the mess and kept it to myself. After that, things became more and more strange. Brandon started following me around the house. I'd catch him peeking around corners, watching me from the doorways. Sometimes when I was cooking or reading, I'd look up to find him sitting across the room, staring without blinking. I never said anything. I must admit, I tried to avoid him as much as I could out of fear. One afternoon, I was watering flowers in the garden when I smelled something off. A sharp, sour odor, like something rotting. I traced it to a corner of the yard where the soil looked freshly disturbed. I was curious, so I grabbed one of those little garden shovels and started poking at the soil. When I saw what was there, I nearly screamed. There were 3 dead rabbits buried there. Their bodies were twisted and cut in several places.
That's Brandon again.
One had his legs tied together with string. I ran inside to tell my host parents. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph looked concerned at first, until they pulled Brendan aside to ask him about it. He gave an innocent look and said it wasn't him. And that was it. They believed him. Mrs. Joseph said it was probably one of the neighborhood kids and told Brendan to go back inside. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked after that. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise in my room. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow near my bed. It was Brandon. He was standing there, holding something. I blinked a few times and realized what it was. A kitchen knife. I screamed as loud as I could. By the time the parents came rushing in, the knife was gone. Brandon had shoved it under the bed. He convinced them that he'd been sleepwalking. Mrs. Joseph gave me an annoyed look, as if to say, "Why are you making such a fuss?" I pointed to the knife handle sticking out from under the bed and pleaded with them to believe me. Mr. Joseph knelt down, pulled it out, and showed it to Brandon. He just smiled and said he had never seen it before, and they of course believed him. I told them that my door had been locked, so he must have picked it. They told me that was nonsense. I felt so alone. I had no one. I didn't know what to do. For better or worse, the decision was made for me. The next morning, Mrs. Joseph called me to the living room and said I had stolen her jewelry. I was completely confused until she held up a pearl necklace I had never seen before. She told me she had found it in my purse, which she was holding in her other hand. I begged her to believe me, that I hadn't stolen it, but there was nothing I could say to convince her. Brandon stood in the hallway smiling to himself. I knew it was him. They fired me on the spot. I flew back to France the next day. I couldn't believe how easily Brandon had destroyed my life. For months afterwards, I was extremely depressed. I thought I had blown my one chance at living in the US and feared I wouldn't get another one. Fortunately, I found my way back to the States several years later and still live here. I have a good job and good friends. I still think about Brandon from time to time.
That is crazy.
I can only imagine the evil person he's grown up to become.
And it will make you more careful of like even people around you. Like, you know, when you come back to the state, you'll be like, okay, I can't trust anybody in the state. This is how American kids are. Damn. I mean, some kids are like that. Basically, like if you get people to like come and watch them and stay at their house, they tend to want to kick you out. Like they don't want you there, so they start doing crazy shit just to get you out the house. Cause I was searching what an au pair is, but it's basically somebody that travels from a foreign country to come babysit your kid in exchange of like a room in the house. So it's like babysitting, but like you get a room in their house. Yeah, something like that. Cause I was like, what is that? But it's like a foreigner that comes and like watch kids and they get a room in exchange. Oh fuck. Oh, they get to stay in America. Got a story too.
For most people, traveling alone is terrifying, and understandably so. For some reason, it's never bothered me all that much. I've always been quite independent and outgoing, so befriending new people comes naturally to me. It's probably one of the reasons I decided to become an au pair. Also, I've always wanted to become a child psychologist. In my opinion, one of the world's problems could be solved if children had better parenting and proper guidance. Beyond that, I've always wanted to experience America, so working as an au pair was something I seriously considered. I'm originally from Germany, from a tiny village outside Cologne. Most Americans have never heard of it, so when people ask where I'm from, I usually just say Germany. It's easier that way. Before you say anything, I believe that my English is rather good, or so I'm told. It's gotten considerably better since living in the US, and people are often impressed by it. My father is originally from the UK, and did everything in his power to ensure that my English was as good as my German, if not better. I'm not sure if they have them here in the US, but I had an electronic dictionary growing up that doubled as a translator. I remember messing around with it a ton as a kid, plugging in words and translating them with my dad. I also read like crazy when I was younger, which I think definitely helped me. Anyway, my host family lives in a wealthy suburb in Northern California. Their house is unbelievable. You might think living here would be lonely, but the agency does a great job of connecting nearby au pairs, so I immediately clicked with a few girls in the surrounding neighborhoods. My best friend here is an American girl named Jennifer. She's great. She's like me, but a little louder and a little taller. We've been inseparable since we met. We're both here for the same reasons, working, exploring, and trying to make the most of our time abroad. There's a huge college campus nearby, and it's pretty much the only decent place to go out that isn't a $100 Uber away. Both the frat and bar scenes there are pretty good, so that's where we spend most of our weekends. I think a lot of the guys are naturally drawn to us because of our accents, and the international card gets us pretty far. It's supposedly difficult to get into frat parties without being in a sorority here, but we don't have much of an issue. The bars here are a lot more fun though. Our favorite spot is this bar called Tap. I've noticed Americans love giving their nights themes. Taco Tuesday, Wine Wednesday. I guess any excuse to drink on a weekday, you know? It's kind of funny. Tuesdays are the most enjoyable nights of the week for Jenny and I. This story takes place on one of those nights. About a few months after I arrived to the US, I was standing by the bar, waiting on drinks for Jenny and I, when this tall guy with curly brown hair approached me and said, "You're German, right?" That kind of threw me off. People almost never guess I'm German. European, sure, but not German specifically. I don't really have distinctive German features, so anytime anyone's able to guess my nationality, it fascinates me. I laughed and told him he was right, and he introduced himself as Sebi with a confident smile. We talked for a while, and everything was very natural. I'll admit, I get approached.
That is kind of weird. Nigga just walk up to you asking if you're German.
The guys are usually kind of obvious
How you know that?
and cheesy when they talk to me. Sebi felt different. The more we talked, the more it seemed like he was actually interested in me as a person as opposed to just hitting on me. He knew a lot of tidbits about German culture, which was something I quite liked about him. A lot of the Americans I don't talk to don't know much about the rest of the world, so it was nice to talk to someone well-traveled, smart, and cultured. We talked and laughed for a while longer before I introduced him to Jenny. He smiled and waved his friend over, an Asian guy who introduced himself as Hunter. He and Jenny immediately hit it off. All in all, it was a great time. Before the night ended, Sebi asked me for my number, and I gave it to him without hesitation. A few days later, Sebi invited me over for dinner. When I got to his place, I expected him to have dinner reservations ready or something, but instead, he was cooking a pasta dish for us in the kitchen. It was quite sweet. I ended up helping him prepare the meal, and he opened a bottle of wine for us. I had such a great time that I ended up sleeping over at his apartment.
Damn.
The next morning, I woke up and examined his room a little. Unlike most college apartments, it was quite clean. He didn't have any posters or typical decorations up, but rather a bunch of landscape pictures. His walls were covered with dozens of square photographs, all black and white. Castles, cities, countryside views, they all looked oddly familiar. I got up and looked at them a little more closely, realizing they all had locations printed on them. They were all from Germany. Every single one, with the exception of a picture of Monte Carlo, Monaco. Sebi had woken up by then, so I turned and asked him jokingly if he had a thing for German architecture. He laughed and told me about his dad's aerial photo collection, which he had picked some of his favorites from. I walked back towards his bed and realized there were some more pictures above his bed. My jaw literally dropped when I saw that one of the pictures was a landscape of my village, taken from above.
Like I knew that was.
The picture was like 20 minutes from my house. I told him this, and he got rather excited, telling me what a crazy coincidence that was. I was amazed. The odds of that were so slim. He then asked me a bunch of questions about my hometown, which I was happy to answer. Over the next few weeks, Sebi and I spent a lot of time together. I was working, and he had class during the week, but we spent every weekend going out together, plus Tuesdays. Everything was great. He was a sweet guy and made sure I was comfortable and enjoying myself when we went out. He was also quite nice to my friends, which I appreciated. His friend Hunter turned out to be a little weird though. Every time someone would play Take It Off by Fisher, he would quite literally start stripping in front of Jenny. One night, Sebi got rather drunk, significantly drunker than usual. As he was walking me to his apartment, he was going on and on about how much he loved German women and how he always wanted a German wife. At one point, he said he always wanted to marry an au pair because foreign girls are great with kids. I brushed it off as some weird fantasy, but that was the first thing he did or said that didn't sit well with me. Obviously not a deal breaker though. He had been perfect up until then. But then came the first time he took me out to dinner. He took me to this Italian spot and told me he picked it because they had plenty of vegetarian options, which was sweet, but I never told him I was vegetarian. I gave him a little smile and playfully asked him how he knew I was vegetarian, and he told me he saw it in one of my Insta posts. That eased me for the rest of the dinner. But later, when I was back home, I realized my only post mentioning it was from years ago, and I post a lot, so you'd have to scroll pretty far to get there, let alone pick up on the caption I had used. And that's not even mentioning the fact that all my posts are from a long time ago in Germany. The next time I stayed over, while Sebi was asleep, I unlocked his phone. I remembered his password. He hadn't exactly been careful about hiding it. What I found in there was sickening. There was a folder in his camera roll titled Wife, which contained screenshots of my social media dating back months. Posts, captions, tagged locations, even screenshots of old stories I didn't even remember posting. His notes app was even worse. There were English translations of my old posts in there, plus a rough schedule of when and where I'd go out based on my Instagram story posts. There was information in there about my hometown, about Germany, about things I liked, all based on my Instagram, if you could believe it. But the worst thing I found in his phone was a photo of my driver's license. Everything hit me at once. The second night I had gone out in America, I had lost my wallet at a frat party, which had my ID in it. That's how he found my Instagram. That's how he knew everything. Where I was from, what I liked, my birthday. None of it was chance. He had planned all of it. There was a long graphic message that went into disgusting detail about what he wanted to do to me, which I don't want to talk about. I didn't know who the guy in those messages was. I couldn't stand to look at everything anymore, so I grabbed my stuff and slipped out of his apartment without making a sound. Regrettably, I didn't take any photos for evidence. The whole drive back to my host family's house, my hands were shaking. Germans take privacy seriously. I felt sick. My au pair profile was private, but my ID? He had my full name, and with that, I knew he could have found anything. I didn't sleep that night. I prayed that he hadn't been able to figure out my host family's address. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. They were all from Sebi, asking me where I went, why I left, if I went through his phone. I sent him one final message, telling him that if he ever tried to contact me again, I'd call the police. Then I blocked him on everything. For the next few days, I lived in perpetual fear, worrying that he'd show up at any moment. I privated my Instagram, locked everything down, and created a close friend story for when I went out, just in case he tried to find me again. Thankfully, he hasn't shown up yet, and it's been about 3 months since I last heard from him. Still though, I can't help but feeling this pit in my stomach that he knows my host family's address, and that he's planning something. I hope I never see him again, but I'll update if something else happens. Update. I hoped I wouldn't have to do this, but the past few weeks, I noticed the same silver car driving up and down my host family's street, sometimes just sitting across the street from their house. He's also tried to reach out to me through fake phone numbers and Instagram accounts, all within the same time frame. The messages always just ask me to talk, but I haven't responded to any of them. All this gives me reason to believe he knows where I'm living, and that I'm potentially in danger. I'm building a case to present to the police, but I've heard that they don't take this kind of thing very seriously. Luckily, my au pair commitment ends soon, so I'll be back in Germany soon enough.
Damn, bro, that is a you-ass nigga, bro. Nigga, that's creepy as fuck.
Fucking Joel.
Yeah, that's Joe-ass nigga, man.
This happened a few years ago. I've always wanted to live in Europe, ever since I was a kid. It was my lifelong dream. More than anything, though, I wanted to work with kids. I've always had a way with them, and I knew ever since I was little that I wouldn't be fully content with my life if my job didn't involve caring for or teaching kids in some capacity. So when I found out I could become an au pair in France, where I could use my French from high school and be part of a family, it felt like everything was falling into place. The decision wasn't easy. I'm from Canada, and the move was a big one, but France had favorable visa options for Canadians, and it was the perfect chance to improve my French, Canada's second language. Plus, I had a few friends in Paris, so I wouldn't be entirely alone there. Money, though, was a problem. I didn't have family support. I won't get into why, that's personal, but let's just say I was on my own. I couldn't afford one of those expensive agencies, so I used a free au pair website instead. Not ideal, but it was all I could manage. That's how I connected with Leah. Leah's ad was warm and straightforward. She needed help with her 2 kids while her husband traveled for work. She seemed wonderful, very polite and very friendly. On our video calls, she was quick to call me Cherie and Mabel, which felt different from home, but in a charming, motherly way. She asked a lot about me, how I was with kids, how I felt about family life, but didn't talk much about herself. Still, she felt genuine. I trusted her. The only thing that felt off was the kids. I asked to meet them on our calls more than once. Leah always had a reason why they couldn't join. One was napping, the other was at school, or they were on a play date with a friend. She promised I'd meet them the second I arrived. It felt a little strange, but I figured I'd see them soon enough. Leah sent me a formal agreement. Everything looked proper, and we agreed on my start date. I booked my flight, packed my life into a suitcase, and said goodbye to Canada. When I landed at Charles de Gaulle, Leah wasn't there. That surprised me. From everything I had heard, most host families meet their au pairs at the airport. But then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Leah, telling me that she was stuck in traffic and instructing me to go to the side drop-off area where she'd have me picked up. I remember using Google Translate on her message because it sounded like she was going to have someone else pick me up, and I wanted to double-check. I was right, and that made me confused and a little unsettled. Despite that, I followed her instructions. A few minutes later, a car drove up, and a woman approached, late 40s maybe, with short blonde hair and a bright smile. She looked nothing like Leah. She introduced herself as Leah's cousin and said, "You must be Leah's au pair. She sent me to get you." I hesitated. Something felt off immediately. I asked her if I could talk to Leah and unlocked my phone. She told me that Leah was probably still driving and assured me that she'd be waiting for me at home.
Oh, hell.
I called Leah anyway, and it went straight to voicemail. It didn't even ring. The woman kept telling me that I'd be fine with a huge smile on her face. I was confused, but also exhausted from the flight. And what was I supposed to do? Stand there in the airport forever? So I did what she said and got in the car. The woman kept the conversation going non-stop as we drove. She asked about my flight, my life in Canada, and if I was excited to start my new job. But when I tried to steer the conversation back to Leah or the children, she brushed it off. Just said that I'd love them and that I'd see them soon. I started to feel worse and worse about the whole situation. She was too polished, too eager to keep me talking without actually answering anything. The scenery outside began to change. I had the address in Google Maps, and the route we were taking didn't match. We were heading away from the suburbs and into what looked like an industrial-type area. I started panicking. I felt like I was in the process of being abducted. I asked her directly where we were going, and she responded lightly, calling it a shortcut, again repeating that Leah was expecting us. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew at that point that she was lying. I told her to take me back to the airport, but she didn't answer. I told her I'd call the police if she didn't take me back to the airport, and she told me to relax. But I wasn't letting up. No matter what I said, she just kept repeating herself about Leah and insisted that I was overreacting. The next time the car slowed down, I kicked the door open and jumped out onto the street. The woman didn't drive off. Instead, she kind of just looked at me like I was the one who was acting crazy. I called my mom, who told me to get away from the car, get somewhere safe, and call for help. As I was talking to my mom, I looked through the windshield and noticed the woman now on her phone, speaking rapidly in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't French, and it definitely wasn't English. I couldn't shake the gut feeling that she was talking to Leah. There wasn't another car in sight, but under no circumstance was I getting back in that vehicle. Eventually, the driver's side door opened, and the woman took a step towards me. I screamed that I was on the phone with the police, and that actually got her to stop. Without saying another word, she went back to the car, threw my suitcase onto the road, and then sped off. I got the license plate as she drove away, but I was on the verge of tears with my mom still on the phone. I ended up hitchhiking to one of my friend's houses. I honestly don't know what I would have done without that option. My friend's family helped me report everything to the police, and eventually even agreed to help me with a fare back to Canada, which I was beyond grateful for. Eventually, they updated me on what the police informed them. Apparently, there was no registered au pair family by Leah's name. The number Leah used was prepaid and untraceable. All the photos of the children were taken from the internet. I Everyone I talk to about this tells me the same thing. I was moments away from being trafficked. The worst part about that whole thing is that I wasted all that money on those plane tickets and traumatized myself permanently. Looking back, I know how lucky I am. I was moments away from something terrible, something I could barely let myself imagine.
That's
The
insane.
whole situation was calculated from start to finish, and if I hadn't trusted my gut, I might not be here to tell the story.
Yeah,
It took some time, but I eventually made my way back to France, this time through a verified agency. I'm hoping to eventually fulfill residency requirements and become a permanent citizen here.
damn, that's crazy. Hey man, I gotta be careful out there, man. You never know what the fuck people are doing, bro. Like, damn, bro, it was shit. If she didn't jump out the car, man, it would have trafficked her, man.
Yeah,
That's crazy, bro.
Their ass up, bro.
Yeah. And damn, man, nigga just came from Canada just to make some money, man.
Bro, now this story's
That shit
crazy.
was crazy.
Yeah.
All the stories are wild. The first one,
Yeah, that boy shit, man, that was crazy.
that's one spoiled ass little kid,
Yeah.
bro. That needs to be beat the fuck up.
He needs to spank it.
Somebody need to beat his ass.
Yeah, it look like they don't-
Not spank him, beat his ass.
Yeah.
Jump that nigga.
You need to spank that nigga butt, man. He needs some whoop. Hey, man, but anyway, man, let us know which one spooked y'all the most, man.
Yeah.
Comment down below what other video y'all want us to check out.
And we get right into it. And we out.
Peace.